On my 75th birthday, a day I hadn't even planned to make a big deal out of, my sister Vivian looked at me from the other end of the long dining table and smiled in a way that made everyone suddenly quiet. She called my name and casually asked if I was enjoying my $500,000 trust fund, and I just stared at her, completely lost because I had no idea what she was talking about. When I finally asked what trust fund she meant, my voice came out small and shaky, and that's when I noticed my son Reggie freeze and his wife Chelsea turn pale, both of them looking like they wished they could disappear. Vivian then faced them with her serious, businesslike tone and asked what they had done with the money, and the silence that followed felt heavy and uncomfortable, the kind that tells you something is very wrong. That night didn't feel like a birthday at all. It felt like the start of a painful change I wasn't ready to face. I sat at the head of the table, feeling out of place among the fancy dishes and glasses, thinking about how I was 75 years old and had only agreed to come because Reggie insisted, and because a mother always hopes even when it hurts. My name is Delilah Ames and I grew up learning to stay quiet and put others first, married young, raised 2 children and lost my husband 5 years ago. Since then I've lived alone in a small apartment called the Heights, getting by on a modest pension that barely covers my needs, while my son lives in a large 3-story house with a big yard and a swimming pool, in a world that feels very far from mine. Chelsea, my daughter-in-law, is always dressed in expensive brands and changes her SUV every couple of years, and my grandchildren go to private schools where 1 month's fees cost more than 3 months of my rent. I always told myself they must have worked very hard for this life and that I had no right to expect anything, because I had already done my duty by raising my children. But that evening when Vivian spoke, something deep inside me finally shifted, as if a long sleeping part of me had suddenly opened its eyes. Vivian Ellington is my younger sister, 70 years old, living a few states away, successful, running her own business, traveling often and always looking sharp and confident. We don't meet much, maybe once or twice a year, not because we argue, but because our lives went in very different directions, or at least that's what I believed. She came that night with a beautifully wrapped gift and a bottle of wine that clearly cost more than my weekly food budget, hugged me tightly and told me I looked good, even though we both knew I looked tired and worn. She sat beside me and talked about her work and travels while Reggie and Chelsea smiled politely from across the table, and the house felt quiet and awkward, with the grandchildren upstairs and long pauses no one knew how to fill. Then Vivian poured herself another drink, looked at me with that serious, focused look, and said she had been wondering about something for a long time before casually asking if I was enjoying my $500,000 trust fund. Everything around me seemed to stop. The number echoed in my head, and when I asked what trust fund she meant, my voice sounded small and unsure. She looked surprised and said it was the fund my husband had set up for me before he passed, and in that moment, I felt as if the ground under my feet was no longer steady. My husband, my late husband, had set up a trust fund, and yet he had never told me a single word about it. I had never seen any papers, never received any payments, and never even knew it existed, so I could only whisper that I knew nothing about it as my eyes filled with tears. Vivian slowly set her glass down and her whole expression changed, turning from a warm sister into a serious, no-nonsense woman who clearly would not accept excuses, and she looked straight at Reggie and Chelsea and asked them in a calm but firm voice what they had done with the money. Reggie tried to laugh it off and said there must be some mistake, but Vivian cut him short and explained that she had personally been there when the papers were signed, that the money was meant for me, and that I was supposed to receive regular payments for the rest of my life. Chelsea quickly made an excuse and rushed out of the room, while Reggie stayed behind, unable to look at me, and in that painful moment, everything became clear to me without anyone saying it out loud. I realized my sister was telling the truth, and I understood that the comfortable life my son was living had been built on something that was meant for me. When Reggie tried to speak, using the same nervous tone he had as a child, I stopped him because I wasn't ready to hear explanations. I needed a moment to think and to breathe. Vivian then said she was calling the lawyer who handled the trust, and even though Reggie tried to stop her, she went ahead anyway, while I sat there staring at my untouched food, shocked by the thought that I had been struggling on a very small income all this time while my own money was out of my reach. The tears finally came, not just from sadness, but from deep hurt and disappointment, and when Vivian finished the call, she held my hand and gently told me that help was on the way and that we were going to set things right. Reggie stayed in his chair, red-faced and nervous, while Chelsea still hadn't come back, and what was supposed to be a happy birthday dinner slowly turned into a very uncomfortable and heavy evening, with me sitting there realizing I had been kept in the dark about my own life. To really understand how I ended up at that table feeling small and confused, you have to know who I was long before that night, because I had always been the kind of woman who put everyone else first and herself last. I was the one who served, who listened, who helped, and who never asked for much in return, and that's how I lived for 75 years. My husband Jeremiah passed away 5 years ago from a sudden heart problem, and he had always been a quiet, hard-working man who handled all our money matters while I simply trusted him and signed where he told me. We lived a simple life, not rich, not struggling, just steady and calm, or so I believed. When he was gone, I felt completely lost because I had never handled any of those things on my own, and Reggie stepped in and said he would take care of everything. He told me there were some bills to settle, that the house had to be sold, and that my monthly income would be small, and I believed him without asking questions because I didn't know anything about finances or legal matters. I moved into a tiny apartment far from my old neighborhood, with a small kitchen and constant little problems, paying low rent and living on a very tight budget. I learned to count every dollar, buy only the cheapest food, walk instead of taking transport, and turn off every light to save money, never once imagining that my life could have been very different. Reggie came to see me about once a month, always in a hurry and always looking at his phone, and he would give me $200 and say it was all he could manage, and I would thank him like he had done me a huge favor, even though that small amount decided whether I could afford something better to eat or not. Chelsea never came with him, saying she was always busy, and when I did see her, she looked at me in a way that made me feel like I was in the way rather than truly welcome. My grandchildren hardly spoke to me and treated me more like a visitor than family, and whenever I went to their house, they quickly disappeared into their rooms while I sat alone in their big, beautiful living room, feeling small and out of place. I couldn't understand how my son had built such a grand life, with a huge house, fancy furniture, and a kitchen that looked like it came from a magazine, and I honestly believed he must just be more talented and more driven than his father. I never once imagined that what he had was actually built with money that should have been mine. My days in the apartment all felt the same, waking up early for no reason, drinking weak coffee, watching people through the window as they hurried to lives that seemed full of purpose. I cleaned, cooked for one, saved leftovers, and kept the television on just to hear another voice, while the neighbors stayed polite but distant. To them, I was simply the quiet woman in apartment 203, the one who caused no trouble, paid her rent on time, and slowly sold the last of her jewelry whenever money ran short. That I had one close friend named Pet who lived next door, and even though she was a widow like me, her life was very different because her children called her every day, visited often, and even paid for her trips, and I quietly wished I had the same. She noticed things about me, like how my son was never around, how I wore the same clothes, and how sometimes she heard me crying at night, and one afternoon over tea she told me gently that staying quiet and accepting everything would never earn me any reward, and that sometimes you have to speak up instead of letting pain stay inside you. I laughed it off and told her I was fine and that my son did what he could, but she looked at me seriously and said that one day I would wake up and she hoped it wouldn't be too late. Her words stayed with me, and memories started coming back of how I worked extra jobs to help Reggie, how I stayed up with him when he was sick, how I sold my wedding ring to pay for his studies, and how, little by little, he began to act ashamed of me. I remembered how he stopped introducing me to people, how he didn't want me near his school, and how at his wedding I was seated far away like I didn't matter. And still I kept telling myself this was just how life was and that I shouldn't be a burden. I repeated that word to myself for years, telling myself I was fine and didn't need anything, even though deep down I knew I was lying to avoid facing the truth that I had been pushed aside long before any money was taken from me. I had confused being ignored with being a good mother and thought that was what love looked like. Then, in the weeks before my birthday, things suddenly changed and Reggie started calling more often and insisted I come to his house, saying they had something special planned and that the children wanted to see me, and I believed him, feeling hopeful for the first time in a long while, thinking that maybe, at last, I truly mattered to them. Pet helped me get ready that evening, lending me a pretty shawl, fixing my hair, and telling me I looked lovely, but before I left she also said something that felt like a gentle warning, telling me that if anything felt strange I shouldn't stay quiet and that I deserved more respect than I thought. I laughed it off and told her not to worry, that it was just a family dinner and everything would be fine, but as the car took me to Reggie's house, I felt a heavy knot in my stomach, as if something was wrong even though I didn't want to admit it. When I arrived, the house was full of light, soft music and the smell of fancy food, but everything felt forced, from Reggie's overly big smile to Chelsea's overly sweet greeting and even the children's quick hugs before they disappeared again. Sitting at that huge table, I felt more alone than I ever did in my small apartment. And then Vivian arrived, my sister I hadn't expected to see, and I could tell from Reggie's face that he hadn't expected her either, even though I didn't yet know she was about to change everything. Looking back, I realize it all really started 3 weeks before my birthday when I was still living my simple routine, getting by on a small monthly income and telling myself that somehow things would improve. One Tuesday afternoon as I was watching the news, Reggie called, which was strange because he almost never called during the week, and when he spoke his voice sounded too careful, too planned, as if he was trying to hide something. He asked how I was, then brought up my birthday and suggested having a special dinner at his house, and I was so surprised that I didn't know what to say because no one had done that for me in years. I told him he didn't need to bother and that I was fine as always, but he insisted, and even though I tried to sound calm, a small part of me felt a quiet hope start to grow. Reggie told me he really wanted to do this dinner and that the children would be there too, and even though his voice sounded a little too eager and nervous, I chose to believe him because I wanted to think that maybe at last he truly cared. So I agreed and thanked him, and he quickly said he would send a car for me and that I shouldn't worry about anything before hanging up like he always did, leaving me sitting there with the phone in my hand, feeling both hopeful and uneasy. I kept asking myself why this was happening now and what had suddenly changed. But in the days that followed, I found myself thinking about that dinner again and again, letting myself imagine that maybe our relationship could improve. About a week later, Reggie called again, and this time he sounded more tense and asked if I had spoken to my sister Vivian recently, which surprised me because we only talked every few months and I told him it had been a while. He said it was nothing and then added that it might be better to keep the dinner small, just close family, and even though I agreed, that strange feeling in my chest grew stronger. When I told Pet about it over tea, she looked at me very seriously and asked if I truly trusted my son, and even though her words hurt, I defended him like I always did, saying he did what he could and that he wasn't a bad person. She gently pointed out how different our lives were and how little he actually did for me, and when she suggested that maybe he wasn't helping me at all, I almost cried and begged her not to say such things, because believing that would have been too painful. She squeezed my hand and asked me to listen. And in that moment I felt torn between what I wanted to believe and what I was starting to fear. Pet told me that I was too kind and that people like me often get taken advantage of, and while she said she wasn't calling my son a bad person, she warned me to start paying attention and not accept everything without thinking. Her words stayed in my mind for days, and even though I tried to push them away and tell myself she was just being negative, I began to lie awake at night asking questions I had never dared to ask before. I wondered why Reggie was living so comfortably if I had been left with so little, why my husband's long years of work had only turned into a small monthly payment for me, and why Reggie had handled all the paperwork without ever showing me anything. One afternoon, driven by a feeling I couldn't ignore anymore, I opened the old box in my closet filled with papers and memories, and at the bottom I found a folder from my husband's funeral with a letter from the lawyer who had handled everything, addressed to Reggie and with a name and phone number on it. I held that paper for a long time, unsure if I should call, feeling as if I didn't have the right to question anything, but Pet's words kept coming back to me, so I slipped it into my bag even though I didn't use it right away. A few days before my birthday, something else strange happened when Reggie came to my apartment without warning, something he had never done before, and he looked around as if he were seeing my small, difficult life for the first time. He said he needed to talk and quickly asked if I was coming to the dinner, repeating that it was very important, and even though I told him I would be there, the nervous way he ran his hand through his hair made me feel even more uneasy. Reggie was sweating even though my apartment was cool, and he kept asking in a nervous way if anyone had called me about my husband or about money, and when I said no, he quickly warned me about scammers who sometimes bother widows and told me to ignore any such calls and tell him right away before leaving in a hurry. As soon as he was gone, I stood there with a heavy feeling in my chest, and that night I couldn't sleep at all, turning from side to side and thinking about his strange visit, his questions and his sudden concern. The next day I finally took out the paper with the lawyer's number, and after staring at it for hours I called, and when I told the office who I was, the lawyer himself came on the line and grew very serious as soon as I mentioned a trust, saying we needed to talk urgently. My birthday arrived under a dull gray sky, and I woke up early with his words still echoing in my head, knowing he wanted to meet and tell me things that should have been said years ago. But I asked him to wait until after the family dinner because a part of me still hoped there was some simple explanation. That morning, Pet came over with a small cake and one candle so I wouldn't spend the day without at least a small celebration, and as we sat there with weak coffee, she kept looking at me like she could sense something was wrong. When she finally asked, I told her about the call, the lawyer's serious tone, and the feeling that something big and painful was about to come out, even though I still wasn't ready to face it. Pat put her plate down and told me very seriously that wherever I went that night I should not stay quiet, that if something felt wrong or if anyone treated me poorly, I should speak up or even leave, because I didn't owe anyone anything, especially not the person who had made me feel small for so many years. When I whispered that he was my son, she reminded me that I was his mother, the one who worked herself to exhaustion and even sold her wedding ring to give him a future, and that I should never forget that. Her words stayed with me as she hugged me tightly and told me to call her no matter how late it was when I got back. I spent the rest of the day watching the clock, getting ready slowly, putting on my only decent dress and fixing my hair, looking at my tired reflection and wondering what 75 years of life had really brought me. When the car arrived, the driver kindly wished me a happy birthday, and I thanked him without telling him how heavy my heart felt. As we reached Reggie's bright, luxurious house, my stomach tightened, and when Chelsea opened the door in an expensive dress and greeted me with a perfect but distant smile, I already felt out of place. Inside, everything smelled rich and fancy, and Reggie gave me a quick, empty hug while the children barely looked up from their phones. We sat through awkward, shallow conversation, and I could see how nervous Reggie was, checking his phone and speaking like he was reading from a script. Then the doorbell rang and the color drained from their faces, and when Chelsea finally opened the door, my sister Vivian walked in with her usual confidence, carrying a golden-wrapped gift and a bottle of wine, and in that moment I knew the quiet, uncomfortable evening was about to change in a way no one had planned. "DIL," Vivian said, her face lighting up as she ran to hug me, and it wasn't a quick, polite hug, it was a real, tight embrace. "Happy birthday, sister. 75 years. I can't believe it." I was stunned. "Vivian, I didn't know you were coming," I whispered. She smiled. "I wanted to surprise you. Reggie told me about your birthday dinner and I couldn't miss it. 75 doesn't happen every day." I glanced at Reggie. It was clear he hadn't told her anything. She had come on her own and he clearly hadn't expected her. "Aunt Vivian, what a surprise," he said, his voice tense. "That's why it's a surprise, nephew," she replied, calm and confident. Vivian sat beside me and took my hand. "How are you, Delilah? You look thinner." "I'm fine," I lied. "Are you sure? Are you eating enough? Do you have enough with what you have?" Her questions weren't rude, but they struck at truths I usually kept hidden. I said, yes, everything's fine." She gave me a look that clearly showed she didn't believe me, but she didn't push. Instead, she turned to Reggie and Chelsea. "What a beautiful house you have. Every time I visit, I'm more surprised. How's business, Reggie?" "Good, everything's going well," he said. "I'm glad," she continued, "because I know it's not easy to maintain a lifestyle like this. The private schools, the cars, the house. It all costs money. But I imagine your investments have helped." Reggie cleared his throat and said, "I've been lucky." "Luck helps, but so does the initial capital, right?" The tension in the room thickened. I couldn't explain why, but something in Vivian's tone felt deliberate, as if she knew a secret only she understood. Chelsea reappeared from the kitchen. "Dinner is ready." We moved to the enormous dining room, a table set for 12 with fine china, silverware and elegant cloth napkins, everything so far removed from my life. I was seated at the head of the table with Vivian on my right, Reggie and Chelsea across from me, and the children silently at the ends. The food was exquisite. Salads I didn't recognize, baked salmon, herbed potatoes, and wine everyone sipped except me, while polite conversation floated through the room but said nothing. Then Vivian put down her fork, took a long sip of wine, and looked at me with an unreadable expression before asking the words that would change everything. "Delilah, I want to ask you something that's been on my mind. Are you enjoying your $500,000 trust fund?" Time seemed to stop. The room went silent. All I could hear was my own heart pounding. $500,000. Trust fund. The words made no sense. "What trust fund are you talking about?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Vivian frowned. "The trust fund your husband Jeremiah left for you before he passed. I was there when he signed the documents." Vivian's words hit me like a punch. $500,000 so you could live comfortably and never have to worry, she said firmly. Tears pricked my eyes. I don't know anything about that, I whispered, my voice trembling. Vivian set her glass down with a sharp thud, her gentle, caring sister side gone, replaced by the strict, no-nonsense professional I had always respected. He turned to Reggie and Chelsea. "What did you do with the money?" The room went silent, so heavy I felt it pressing down on me. Reggie and Chelsea froze, unable to move, while the grandchildren looked from one adult to another, confused and scared. My chest tightened as a cold realization hit me. I had suspected something for years, but I had refused to face it. Reggie stammered, "Aunt Vivian, I think there's a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," Vivian said, cutting him off, voice sharp. "I witnessed your father signing those documents. $500,000 in a trust for Delilah, with $4,000 a month guaranteed for life. Legally protected so she would never go without. $4,000 a month. I was living on $750. My mind raced, unable to grasp the reality. "Mama," Reggie said, looking at me, voice weak, "let me explain." "No," Vivian interrupted, raising her hand. "Answer me first. Where is the money? Why is your mother living on a tiny pension? Why does she know nothing about the trust?" Chelsea jumped up, almost tipping her chair. I need to go to the bathroom," she mumbled, practically running from the room. The children followed, asking to go to their rooms, and Reggie said nothing. It was just the three of us. Vivian furious, Reggie terrified, and me in the middle, feeling my world unravel. I found my voice, shaking but firm. "Reggie, is this true?" His hands trembled as he ran them over his face, sweat glistening on his forehead. "Mama, it's complicated." "It's not complicated," Vivian said sharply. "Yes or no, did you know about the trust fund?" Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating, and in that moment, I finally realized the betrayal had been there all along. Reggie's face went pale, his hands shaking as he tried to explain, but I could barely hear him over the pounding of my own heart. "Mama, I thought I was doing the right thing," he stammered. "Your father made me administrator of the trust. I was supposed to manage it, to invest it, to protect the money for the family's future." "The family's future?" Vivian's voice cut sharply. "What about your mother's future? She was the beneficiary. That money was hers, not yours." "I planned to give it to her, when the time was right," Reggie said weakly. "When?" I demanded, my voice trembling with anger and years of pain. "When I was struggling, when I couldn't pay my rent, when I had to sell my things to survive. How could you live in luxury while I was living on less than $800 a month?" Reggie tried to justify himself. But I didn't want excuses. Vivian pulled out her phone. "I'm calling Elias Carter right now. He has all the documents and the proof. This ends tonight." Reggie panicked. "Aunt Vivian, wait. This isn't necessary. We can handle it within the family." "Handle it?" I said sharply. "By giving me crumbs whenever you choose? By continuing to lie to me?" Chelsea returned to the room, her eyes red, standing near the door as if ready to flee. Vivian dialed the number. "Elias, this is Vivian Ellington. I'm here with my sister Delilah. We need you here immediately." "Yes, it's about the Jeremiah Ames Trust Fund." "Excellent. We'll wait for you." She hung up and turned to us. "He's coming with all the documents. Tonight, this is settled." Chelsea whined, "You can't do this. This is our house and that's my sister-in-law's money." "The money you misused," Vivian said firmly. Reggie protested, "I didn't steal anything. I was the administrator." "Yes, but you were supposed to manage it for your mother's benefit, not for yourself," Vivian said, her voice cutting through the tension. And in that moment I felt everything I had endured, the years of struggle, loneliness and trust, fall away, leaving the truth standing clear in front of me for the first time. Vivian stepped closer to Reggie and said in a firm, steady voice that what he had done had serious consequences, that using someone else's money for himself was not just wrong but could bring heavy trouble. Reggie started to panic and tried to explain, saying he never wanted to hurt me and only thought he could manage the money better, invest it and grow it. Vivian didn't let him hide behind excuses and asked where the original $500,000 was now, along with 5 years of profit, because from what she could see, it was all turned into this big house, the cars and the expensive lifestyle while I had been struggling to get by. I sat there listening, feeling like I was watching someone else's story instead of my own, unable to believe they were talking about my own son. Finally, I spoke in a very calm voice and asked him to look me in the eyes and answer one simple question. "In all these 5 years, Did he ever feel even a little bad about me living alone and struggling while he lived in comfort? I told him to answer yes or no, but he said nothing, and that silence gave me all the answers I needed. Then I turned to Chelsea and asked if she knew, and she quietly nodded, not even brave enough to say it out loud. I stood up and told them both that they had watched me struggle, watched me save every coin, watched me wear the same old clothes, and watched me refuse invitations because I couldn't even afford transport. And still they said nothing and kept taking what was mine while making me feel like I was a burden. Tears were falling, but my voice was steady because something inside me had finally changed. I told them the worst part was not even the money, but that they had taken my pride and made me feel small and worthless, as if I should be grateful for the little they gave me, even though they knew the truth all along. Reggie tried to come closer, but I stopped him and told him not to touch me, and when he said he would return everything, Vivian asked him how, because if all the money had already been spent on this lifestyle, where would he find not just the original amount but also all the payments I was supposed to receive, which together were now more than $700,000, a number that made my head spin and my heart feel heavy. They had taken away a whole lifetime of safety from me in just. Then the doorbell rang, breaking the heavy silence in the room. Vivian went to answer it and came back with a serious-looking man in his 60s, wearing a dark suit and carrying a leather briefcase, and he introduced himself as Elias Carter, saying he was sorry we were meeting under such painful conditions. I stood up even though my legs were weak and told him we had spoken on the phone, and he nodded and said he deeply regretted not speaking to me directly 5 years earlier because he had wrongly assumed my son had told me everything. He opened his briefcase, took out a thick folder and placed it on the table, saying all the papers were inside, including the will, the trust papers and the management documents, all signed by my husband and by Reggie. As he showed me the pages, my eyes filled with tears, but I could still see the numbers, the $500,000, the $4,000 monthly payments, and my name clearly written as the only person meant to receive it. He explained that my husband had been very clear that this money was only for me, and while Reggie was allowed to manage it, he was legally required to send me the payments every month, and using that money for anything else was against the rules. Reggie collapsed into a chair and Chelsea cried quietly, while I stood there staring at the papers that proved how deeply I had been deceived. The lawyer laid the documents across the table one by one, and each page felt like another reminder of the life I had been wrongly living. He asked me gently if I had ever received any payments in the past 5 years, and I told him no, that I didn't even know the fund existed, and when he asked if anyone had explained the will to me, I said Reggie had only told me there were debts and that we had to sell the house and that only a small pension was left. He shook his head and explained that there were no debts at all, that the house was sold and that money, along with my husband's savings and insurance, made up the full amount of the trust and it was all meant for me. I had to sit down because my legs could no longer hold me, and then he added that my husband had even given instructions to sell the house and add that value to the fund so I could live comfortably without worry. And when I realized that $4,000 a month for 5 years meant $240,000 that I never received, my chest felt tight and my heart felt unbearably heavy. $240,000 that had been mine, my security for years gone while I counted pennies just to buy bread. Elias turned to Reggie and asked, "Where is the money?" My son buried his face in his hands and muttered that he had invested it in the house, in the business, in the children's schools, in everything. Elias asked again more firmly if there were any records, account statements, or documents to prove these investments had been made to benefit me. There was only silence. "Let me ask another way," the attorney said. "Can you return the original $500,000 plus the monthly payments owed to your mother?" Still nothing. Chelsea was sobbing quietly while Vivian's voice was sharp with contempt. "He can't," she said. "He spent it all on luxuries, appearances, and a life that was never his to take." Elias laid out more papers showing transfers from the trust. $50,000 for a down payment on the house in the first year, $100,000 for renovations, $30,000 on a car, and over the next 2 years, nearly the entire principal gone through small and large transfers. Vivian asked about the remaining 3 years. Loans, more transfers, minor sums that added up to major amounts. "By the time we saw it, almost nothing was left," I repeated in disbelief. Elias lowered his gaze, looking genuinely ashamed. "I knew Reggie was moving the money," he admitted. "As legal administrator he had the authority, but I assumed he was consulting you, that there was family agreement. I never imagined you knew nothing." I glared at him. Why didn't you confirm with me? I should have, he said quietly, and I apologize. But Reggie assured me several times that you were well cared for living with them, that you didn't need monthly payments because he was covering your expenses. I turned to Reggie, my voice shaking with horror. You told him I was living with you? When I was alone, scraping by eating canned soup. Reggie had no answer, could not even meet my eyes. I thought I would bring you here eventually, he stammered. When? In 10 years. Never, I shouted. That was another lie. Chelsea finally spoke, her voice thin and desperate. We wanted to help Delilah, but the children need so many things, the house costs so much to maintain. We weren't trying to hurt you. Vivian laughed, but it was sharp and cold, not a cheerful sound. It was the sound of truth exposing every excuse, every lie, and every betrayal I had endured for 5 long years. Vivian let out a short, bitter laugh and shook her head. So if it wasn't done on purpose, then what was it? Carelessness, selfishness, or just plain greed? She asked sharply. Do you really think it's okay to take money from an old woman just because your children go to expensive schools? Chelsea tried to defend herself in a weak voice, saying they hadn't taken anything, but Elias calmly corrected her and explained that the money had been used in ways it was never meant to be, and that this could bring very serious consequences. Reggie's face went pale when he heard that. But I'm her son, he said quickly. She won't do anything against me. Everyone turned to look at me and I stayed quiet, not because I had nothing to say but because too many feelings were crashing into me at once. Hurt, anger, disappointment, and also something new I hadn't felt in years. Strength, the strange feeling that I finally had a say. Vivian asked how much money was left and Elias, after checking the papers, said it was only about 30,000. 30,000 out of 500,000. My husband's life of hard work almost completely gone in just a few years. Vivian then asked what choices I had and Elias explained that I could try to get the money back through official channels, or I could try to make a private deal with my son, depending on whether I wanted things settled quickly or properly. I stood up and walked to the window, looking outside at the perfect lawn and quiet street, realizing that all of this comfort had been built on my losses. Reggie came up behind me and begged me to tell him what to do, and when I turned to face him, I saw not the little boy I raised, but a man full of fear and regret. I asked him to finally tell me the truth, if he had planned this from the very beginning. He said no, that at first he only took a little for the house and thought he would return it, but little by little it grew and got out of control. I asked him why he never told me, why he never gave me at least something, and he admitted he was scared I would be angry and judge him, so instead he chose to leave me struggling in silence. That I looked at him and said quietly but firmly that he had chosen to let me struggle instead of admitting his mistake, that he had convinced himself I was fine, that I didn't need much, that I was somehow happy living with so little, and those words hurt more than anything else because they showed how little he really understood my life. Happy? I asked. Do you really think I was happy barely getting by, wearing old clothes, and feeling ashamed every time I had to ask you for a small amount of help? When he called me Mama, I stopped him and told him not to use that word because a mother to him had been someone he could ignore, someone whose sacrifices didn't seem to matter, someone he could mislead without feeling bad about it. Chelsea came closer and asked me to think about the children, saying that if this turned into a public matter, they would suffer, and I looked at her in disbelief and asked why no one had ever thought about me when I was the one struggling. I asked what they planned to tell the children one day, that their father had gotten into trouble because he used his own mother's money and she dared to stand up for herself. Vivian stood beside me and gently told me I didn't have to decide anything right away, and Elias said he would prepare a full report with all the records so I could take my time and choose what to do, though he advised not to wait too long. My head was spinning and I felt like I couldn't breathe in that house anymore, so I said I was leaving and Vivian immediately said she would take me. Reggie tried to stop me and said we could still talk, but I told him there was nothing left to discuss tonight, that he had made his choices and now I would make mine. As I walked out, I turned back once and saw him standing there in that big, beautiful house filled with things bought using my money, and for the first time I didn't feel sorry for him at all. I said quietly, "What a birthday this turned out to be," and left. In the car, everything was silent as the city lights passed by, and I stared out the window while tears kept falling without sound, not because I was weak, but because my heart was trying to understand what had just happened. That night, my 75th birthday, became the most painful and the most eye-opening day of my life. The day I finally understood the truth I had been living without for 5 long years. When Vivian softly asked if she should take me home, I just kept looking out the window, knowing nothing would ever feel the same again. Yes, I whispered, and we drove in silence for a while longer until we reached my building, where Vivian turned off the engine and asked if I wanted her to come upstairs with me, but I told her I needed to be alone, even though she worried and said I shouldn't spend this night by myself, and I answered honestly that I had already been alone for 5 years and one more night would not make much difference. She made me promise to call her if I needed anything at all, and after I nodded, I stepped out of the car and slowly walked toward the entrance, feeling as if my whole body was heavy with everything I had learned. Climbing the stairs felt harder than usual, and when I finally reached my door, my hands were shaking so much that I could barely get the key into the lock. When I went inside, I looked around and saw my apartment differently: the small room, the narrow kitchen, the old bathroom with its constant problems, and I realized this had been my entire world while my son lived in comfort. I sat down on the old sofa and finally broke down, crying like I hadn't since my husband passed away, crying for the years I had lost, for all the times I went without, for the moments I felt ashamed that I couldn't give my grandchildren proper gifts, and for every day I had felt like I didn't matter. But mixed with that sadness was anger too, anger that had been trapped inside me for decades, anger at a life that taught me to stay quiet, to accept everything and never to ask questions, and even anger at myself for doing exactly that. I don't know how much time passed before there was a knock at the door, and when I opened it, Pet was standing there with 2 cups of hot tea, saying she had seen me come back and wasn't going to leave me alone. We sat together without speaking at first, and then I told her everything, every detail, every truth, every disappointment, and she listened without interrupting. When I finished, she took my hands and told me that something very important had happened tonight. Not just that I learned the truth, but that I had finally spoken up and stopped staying silent, and that this was the real beginning of a new part of my life. I told her I didn't feel strong at all, only broken, and she said that being broken and being weak are not the same, because sometimes a person has to fall apart before they can rebuild their life in a better and more honest way. As I listened to her, I realized she was right, because that night I hadn't only discovered what had been hidden from me, I had also found my own voice, the one I had kept quiet for 75 years. When she asked what I would do next, I told her I didn't know yet, but that the lawyer would soon send me all the papers, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt that my future, whatever it would be, was finally in my own hands. That I told her that I had choices but didn't know which one to take, and when Pet asked me which options scared me the most, the question caught me off guard because I realized it wasn't the legal fight or even exposing Reggie that truly frightened me, but something much deeper. After thinking for a moment, I admitted quietly that I was afraid of being free, afraid of having my own money, and afraid of no longer needing my son, because without that need, I would have no excuse left to keep living small, staying quiet, and accepting only what others decided to give me. Pet looked at me with a sad but knowing smile and said that this was exactly the fear I had to face, and after she left that night, I lay awake in the dark, thinking about my whole life and how it had always been shaped by other people's voices. I remembered the little girl who wanted to become a teacher but was told that girls didn't need so much education, then the young woman who wanted to work but was told her place was only at home, and later the mother who wanted to finally do something for herself but was told to rest because others would handle everything. My entire life had been built on listening, obeying, and believing that giving up my own wishes was the same as being loving. But that night I finally understood that giving everything without receiving respect in return is not love. It is slowly losing yourself. In the days that followed, everything felt strange and heavy, especially when Elias Carter sent me the full files showing exactly where every bit of the money had gone, and Vivian came every day to help me read and understand everything while reminding me again and again that none of this was my fault. Reggie kept calling and leaving messages, sometimes begging, sometimes promising to fix everything, and sometimes crying, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. And Chelsea's calls were even harder to hear because she tried to make me feel guilty and talked about family and children as if I still owed them something. Through all of this, Pet stayed by my side, coming over for tea and talking with me about life, about disappointment, and about how she had learned that saying no and choosing yourself does not make you a bad person. And slowly, without even noticing, I began to feel that for the first time in my life, I was starting to think about what I wanted, not what others expected from me. One afternoon, Pet asked me, "Do you know the difference between our generation and our daughters?" I shook my head. "They learned they could have it all," she explained. "We learned we deserved nothing. And both lessons are wrong." Her words lingered with me. About a week after my birthday, Vivian came over with a plan. She sat on my sofa, calm but serious, and said, "I've spoken with Elias and I think we have a strategy." I asked what she meant. "A plan that gives you back your money and your dignity, makes Reggie face the consequences, but doesn't destroy the children. They're innocent in all this." I listened as she laid out the steps, and I realized it was smart, fair, but also firm and unyielding. It meant I had to stand my ground, not let guilt or maternal love make me give in. "Can I do it?" I whispered, mostly to myself. "You can," Vivian replied firmly. "But only if you really want to. No one will judge you if you forgive and forget. It's your choice." I asked what she would do. She looked at me steadily. "I already know what I'd do, but I'm not you. I didn't spend 5 years alone in that apartment selling my things just to eat, living under the weight of betrayal. This decision is yours alone." That night I couldn't sleep. I paced the small apartment, imagining futures, weighing options, thinking of what I had endured. As the first light of dawn crept in, I finally knew what I had to do, and for the first time in years, maybe in my entire life, I felt certain. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and studied the woman staring back at me. 75, white hair, hands worn by decades of work, but with eyes that held something new, strength, resolve, a quiet determination that didn't need shouting or fighting. I whispered to myself, "I don't need to raise my voice to be heard. I just need to stop lowering it." I picked up the phone, dialed Elias Carter, and said the words that would change everything. "I want to press charges. We're going to recover what's mine the right way, with justice, dignity, and no pity." 3 days later, Reggie and Chelsea were sitting across from me in Elias Carter's office, and for the first time, I truly felt in control of my life. The attorney had arranged this meeting as part of the plan. A final chance to settle everything without going to court. A meeting that I would control completely. Reggie looked defeated, his eyes sunken, his face unshaven, clothes wrinkled and sloppy. Chelsea sat stiffly, arms crossed, wearing that self-pitying expression that made my stomach turn. Vivian was calm beside me, a steady presence, while Elias sat at his desk, a mountain of documents in front of him. I was in the center, composed, ready. "Thank you for coming," Elias began. "We're here to reach an agreement that avoids a long, costly legal battle." Reggie immediately interrupted, his voice trembling. "Mama, I just want to say I'm sorry. I know there's no forgiveness for what I did, but I swear I'll give it all back." I raised my hand, stopping him. "Not yet. First, you listen." He went silent like a scolded child, but I felt no pity. "For 5 years," I said, calm but firm, "you robbed me, lied to me, and left me in poverty while spending my money on luxuries. You made me feel like a burden and expected me to thank you for the crumbs you gave me. And all that time, you knew the truth and said nothing." "Mama, I'm not finished," he started. I cut him off. "You had countless chances to tell me the truth, to do the right thing, and every time you chose your comfort over my well-being. The rules have changed. Now I choose." Elias set the documents on the table. "These are your options," he said. "Option 1. File a civil lawsuit for misappropriation of fiduciary funds, recover all the money plus interest and damages, around $800,000. Reggie paled. "I don't have $800,000, he muttered. "Then you sell this house," Vivian said sharply. "Sell the cars, liquidate everything, and if it's not enough, pay the rest over time." Elias continued. "Option 2. Criminal charges, fraud, financial abuse of an elder, embezzlement. Offenses that could lead to 5 to 10 years in prison." Chelsea began sobbing. "You can't do that. The children need their father." I looked at her steadily. "Stealing from your own mother has consequences." Elias added option 3, a private agreement. Reggie would return the money under my conditions, sign legal documents acknowledging the debt, and if he defaulted, options 1 or 2 would automatically apply. "What would the terms be?" he asked, voice breaking. I looked to Elias, he nodded, and I spoke. "You will sell the house. That house was bought with my money. It no longer belongs to you." Chelsea screamed. "Where will we live?" "Where you can afford on your own money, just as I had to for 5 years, I replied. "You will liquidate the investment accounts, sell the luxury car, and transfer all the money to a new account in my name, managed by Elias. Every cent you took will be returned on my terms." "That still won't be enough," Reggie said, panic in his voice. "The house has a mortgage. I owe money." "Then you will work to pay it back," I replied firmly. You will pay me $3,000 a month for the next 20 years if needed, legally documented with interest. Miss a single payment, and we proceed with the lawsuit and criminal charges. Chelsea protested, her voice trembling. That's too much. We have expenses, the children can go to public schools, Vivian interrupted sharply. Like millions of children across the country. They won't die because they don't have private tennis lessons. I added, there's one more thing. You will tell your children the truth. Explain to them exactly what you did, to show that stealing is wrong, even when it's from family. Especially when it's from family. Tears ran down Reggie's face. Mama, are you going to destroy my family? He whispered. No, I said firmly. You destroyed your family when you chose to rob me. I am only reclaiming what is mine. If your family struggles because of this, it's because it was built on lies from the start. Elias slid the documents toward Reggie. You have two choices. Sign this agreement now or we see you in court next week. The decision is yours. Reggie hesitated, looking at Chelsea, then Vivian, and finally at me, searching for the forgiving mother he once knew. That mother no longer existed. Sign, I said, or face the full consequences of your actions. With shaking hands, Reggie picked up the pen, reading every page as a reminder of the betrayal he had committed. Chelsea signed as co-debtor. Together they committed to returning everything, liquidating all assets, paying me monthly, and facing severe legal consequences if they defaulted. Elias collected the papers. These are legally binding. You have 30 days to sell the property and transfer the initial funds. Monthly payments start the following month. Reggie slumped into his chair, defeated, but I felt no triumph. Only deep exhaustion, the weight of 75 years spent carrying the expectations of others. Is there anything else you want to say? I asked. His voice barely a whisper. Will you ever forgive me? I don't know, I admitted. Maybe, maybe not. But that no longer depends on you. You did what you did. Now I am going to live my life, with or without your repentance. I stood and Vivian walked with me. We left the office behind, leaving a son to face the consequences of his actions, and a lesson he would never forget. Mothers have limits. Love does not mean allowing abuse, and forgiveness does not mean forgetting or accepting wrongdoing again. Outside, the sun was shining, bright and warm, and for the first time in 5 years, I could see it without my vision clouded by worry or fear. How do you feel? Vivian asked. Free, I said. Finally free. 6 months later, I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, sipping real coffee made from freshly ground beans, the kind I had always seen but never allowed myself. The apartment wasn't huge, but it was mine. 2 bedrooms, a full kitchen, a working bathroom, and a balcony where I could watch the sunrise every morning. It was simple, but it was everything I had waited a lifetime to have. Independence, dignity, and peace. I had rented the new apartment with the money recovered from the sale of Reggie's house. Elias had managed everything flawlessly. The house sold in just 3 weeks. After paying off the mortgage and clearing all debts, $200,000 went straight into my account. The cars were sold, the investment accounts liquidated, and in total I had nearly $300,000 restored to me. It wasn't the full $500,000, but it was more than enough for a 75-year-old woman who wanted nothing more than peace and dignity. Elias reinvested the funds into a new trust fund, this time with me as the sole administrator. No one else could touch it or make decisions about my future. The monthly payments of $2,500 arrived promptly, and Reggie continued his $3,000 monthly contribution for now. Vivian visited often. Sometimes we went out for lunch at nice restaurants. Other times we strolled through the park talking about life. She had helped me see clearly, find my voice, and understand that strength doesn't come from yelling or proving anything. It comes from knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone take it away. Pat remained my steadfast friend. We no longer lived in the same building, but we met almost every day. We drank tea, shared stories, laughed, and reminded each other that true friendship doesn't require shared blood, only honesty, respect, and loyalty. Reggie and I barely spoke. He called maybe once a month, conversations short and awkward. He told me they had rented a smaller apartment, that Chelsea had gotten a job, and the children were adjusting to public school. He asked how I was. I answered in monosyllables. I hadn't forgiven him and I wasn't sure I ever would. But forgiveness wasn't the goal anymore. I had found something far more important: peace. Peace with what had happened, peace with my choices, and peace with myself. The grandchildren sent me occasional texts, short, confused, innocent messages. Reggie had softened the story for them, telling them he had made mistakes with grandma's money and was trying to make amends. They didn't fully understand, but that was okay. One day they would. I began doing things I had never allowed myself to enjoy. I took painting classes and discovered a surprising talent for landscapes. Nothing professional, but it brought me joy, and that was enough. I joined a book club at the neighborhood library, a group of women my age who met weekly to talk about books, life, and everything in between. Many had been disappointed by children or overlooked by families just like me. Together we were learning to live for ourselves after a lifetime of putting others first. One quiet afternoon, while painting on my balcony, the phone rang. I set my brush down, curious. Life had changed, but somehow I felt ready for whatever this call would bring. The call came from an unknown number. I hesitated, unsure if I should answer, but something inside me said I had to. "Mrs. Ames," a young woman's voice asked. "This is Maria. I'm a social worker at the community center. One of the women in your book club shared your story with us, and we wondered if you'd consider speaking to other elderly women who are experiencing family financial abuse." I stayed quiet, stunned. "You don't have to decide now," Maria continued. "But your story could help them find their voice and realize they're not alone." I whispered, "Let me think about it." That night I couldn't sleep. Me sharing my story, helping others after 75 years of being silent? The thought both terrified and inspired me. I told Vivian the next day. She smiled. "Remember what I told you months ago? Sometimes you have to fall apart to rebuild yourself the right way. You fell apart, you rebuilt yourself, and now you can help others do the same." I admitted, "I'm scared." She said gently, "Good. Fear means it matters. It means it's real." A week later I sat in a circle at the community center with 10 women, all over 60, all with stories like mine. Families who had used them, lied to them, or made them feel invisible. I shared everything. The trust fund, the betrayal, the poverty, and the journey to recovery, justice, and peace. When I finished, there were tears in the room, but also hope. Recognition. Relief. One timid woman raised her hand. "How did you find the courage?" she asked. I told the truth. I didn't find it all at once. I built it day by day, choice by choice, by refusing to swallow what was poisoning me. By learning that my voice mattered, that my life mattered, that I mattered. Nearly a year has passed since that birthday night. The night everything changed. I still live in my apartment with the balcony, I still paint, I still read, and I still drink real coffee every morning. But now I also meet with that group twice a month. I guide them on their rights, accompany them to speak with attorneys, and stand by them when fear threatens to silence them. I remind them that taking care of themselves is not selfish, setting boundaries is not cruel, and dignity is something everyone deserves, no matter their age. Reggie continues his payments. Chelsea works. The grandchildren are growing. Maybe one day our relationships will heal, maybe not. But that no longer defines my worth or happiness. This morning, as I watched the sunrise with my coffee in hand, I reflected on the journey. A year ago I was invisible, silent, and convinced my only value was in serving others. Now I am visible, I have a voice, and my value is in simply existing. I stood in front of the mirror and saw the same 75-year-old woman, the same wrinkles, the same white hair, but her eyes had changed. They no longer reflected resignation. They reflected peace, strength, and purpose. I whispered to my reflection, "They stole my years and called it care. I reclaimed them in silence, with truth and courage." I smiled, a real, deep smile from the soul, because I finally understood something essential. Justice doesn't have to be loud, strength doesn't have to be violent, and freedom doesn't always come from outside. Sometimes it comes from within, from deciding you deserve more and taking the steps to claim it. Did you enjoy my story? I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Let's meet in the comments. If it touched you, you can support me with a super thanks, so I can keep sharing more stories like this. Thank you for your support. On screen you'll see 2 more life stories I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you in the next story with love and respect.